You've been trained to believe that ignoring someone is an act of cowardice, escapism, or immaturity. Society has programmed you to think that direct conflict, heated arguments, and the constant need to prove your point are unquestionable demonstrations of strength. Erase that illusion from your mind right now. The grim truth that masters of strategic power have always known is precisely the opposite. Justifying yourself, debating, or even showing that you were affected is the emotional signature of the slave. When you react to provocation, when you try to defend yourself against the criticism of the weak, you commit a lethal crime against your own personal empire. You validate them. By responding, you transfer your authority and crown your aggressor as someone worthy of your attention, the most expensive, scarce, and irreversible currency in the entire universe. Understand the raw and philosophical reality of this game. Mediocrity is by its very nature noisy and desperate. Ordinary people, drowning in the emptiness of their own purpose, need to create chaos to feel alive. They criticize, judge, and offend because their inner abyss compulsively demands a mirror. They need you to feel something, be it anger, pain, or indignation, just to confirm that they exist and have some impact on reality. The ultimate reframing is this: ignoring, in its purest and most merciless form, is the absolute refusal to be the stage for the other's pathetic spectacle. It is looking at the offense and not seeing a threat, but the explicit confession of the other's inferiority. You transform yourself into an unshakable monolith. The attack hits you and falls to the ground, sterile, silent, and harmless. By removing the supply of your attention, you condemn the emotional parasite to lethal starvation. You return it with refined, silent cruelty to the only habitat to which it truly belongs, its own insignificance, and you do this without moving a single muscle in your face. But understanding the philosophical superiority of this stance is merely game theory. The war happens invisibly to the eye. Now I'm going to show you the hidden mechanics that make the simple act of looking away completely dismantle the sanity of anyone trying to control you. Every human interaction is an invisible transaction of energy. When someone attacks or provokes you, that person isn't just uttering words, they're casting a poison hook, desperate to sting your psyche. The hidden mechanism behind aggression is a morbid need for feedback. The ego of the weak functions like a parasitic fire. It only burns if you supply the oxygen of your reaction. The masses believe that the antidote to an attack is verbal violence or passionate defense, but true strategic cruelty dwells in the vacuum. When you choose calculated indifference, you not only cut off the oxygen, you cast the aggressor into a dark and silent space. In absolute vacuum, the sound of the offense simply does not propagate. The attack is nullified not because it met resistance, but because it was sucked into the merciless abyss of your apathy. Understand the structural flaw in the sheep's brain. The mediocre human being would much rather be hated than be invisible. Hatred, after all, is proof that they exist and have the capacity to alter their state of mind. But when you look through an individual as if they were a completely irrelevant specter, you implant a destructive cognitive dissonance in their mind. The manipulator's mental script collapses. They threw a stone into the water expecting a feast of their despair, but the stone disappeared into the darkness without making a single sound. The absence of a response creates a terrifying mirror. Without your indignation to anchor the false narrative of superiority they've created, the aggressor's anger loses its target and turns against themselves. You destroy them from the inside out, forcing them to swallow their own poison. It's the most elegant psychological torture there is. The dark workings of this power are now exposed, but knowing the blade doesn't prevent you from cutting your own hand while trying to wield it, and that leads us to the most humiliating mistake. A pathetic failure that false strategists commit every day, sabotaging any chance of becoming truly untouchable. The most humiliating mistake false strategists make is confusing supreme indifference with the pathetic silent treatment. The masses believe that ignoring someone is a tactic of active punishment. They stop talking, turn their faces away, frown, but inside their blood continues to boil. They block the adversary but spend the night spying on their every move. They remain physically silent, but their minds are a chaotic and exhausting court where they continue arguing and being crushed by the aggressor. This is not power. This is submission disguised as control. It is weakness wearing a cheap mask of superiority. When you use silence merely to demonstrate dissatisfaction, you are still reacting. You're still playing the game by the other person's rules. Your silence in this scenario is scandalous. It screams in despair how much you have been affected, begging for a change of attitude. And believe me, manipulators can smell this false stoicism from miles away. They know that your disdain is a paper armor. and that just one more drop of provocation is enough for you to give in, explode, and hand over what they want. True and lethal indifference requires no effort whatsoever because there is no resentment to contain. You are not heroically holding back from responding. You simply acknowledge that the existence of that individual has no gravitational weight in your universe. The art of ignoring is not a shield you raise to defend yourself from blows. It is the complete annihilation of the target. It is surgical disposal. If you still harbor resentment or count down the hours until revenge, their anchor remains rooted in your flesh, draining your vitality. Now comes the part that changes everything, the exact turning point where you abandon your wounded ego and assume, once and for all, unwavering sovereignty. The shift in power doesn't happen externally. It's a seismic and perfectly silent event that occurs in the trenches of your own mind. The exact moment you cease to be the emotional puppet of the masses is the instant you understand the cold and relentless geometry of emotions. You stop seeing provocations as personal attacks and begin to dissect them from the perspective of pure strategy. They are merely the blind and irrational will of people who have no sovereignty whatsoever over their own intellect. When you reach that dark clarity, you rise to an unattainable level. You become the unquestionable architect of your reality, access the coldness of a strategist at the top of an empire built with intellect and calculation, surrounded by chaos but keeping his mind in rhythm with absolute calm. He doesn't yell at hysterics, he doesn't justify himself to pawns. He simply observes the smaller pieces struggling on the board, knowing that their fury is the explicit confession of his inferiority. The real turning point lies in reclaiming your attention as a scarce and lethal resource. Every glance you divert from what is irrelevant is war energy that returns to your personal arsenal. You are no longer on the defensive. If an individual does not contribute to your objectives, they are immediately relegated to the category of white noise, a harmless shadow passing by the wall. This is where the game irreversibly reverses. The aggressor realizes that his weapons are pathetic against a hardened mind. His refusal to interact becomes an oppressive force, a gravity before which the weak are crushed and reduced to dust. But mastering this inner posture has drastic consequences on the battlefield of the real world. Philosophical theory now translates into direct practical impact. Now I'm going to show you the applied mechanics of this law and the devastating effect your empty gaze will have on the behavior of everyone around you. In practice, the art of ignoring doesn't require a defensive spectacle. It demands surgical precision and lethal economy. When offense, criticism, or someone else's drama invades your territory, your body shouldn't recoil. You don't avert your face like frightened prey. You maintain eye contact but completely empty your presence. Let the parasite look deep into your eyes and find only an opaque, calculating, and insurmountable abyss. You listen but you don't absorb. And your only response will be a dense, cold, and deafening silence. The practical effect of this on the psyche of manipulators is absolute and devastating. The aggressor's brain immediately collapses. Without the fuel for your reaction, you force them into a brutal state of withdrawal. At first, desperation will cause them to double down. They will raise their voices, make hysterical accusations, and try to tarnish your image, labeling you arrogant or insensitive. This is the final gasp of their ego fighting against asphyxiation. Let them bleed. The common and mediocre cannot bear the weight of their own reflection in the mirror of their indifference. Their calculated lethargy acts like a psychological acid, corroding all the false authority they tried to project. By delivering absolutely nothing, you reduce their threat to a ridiculous and pathetic noise. They shrink and crumble before your impassivity, consumed by their own insignificance. But don't be fooled into thinking this posture is just a cheap body language trick. You can't sustain the external void if your mind remains a docile terrain inhabited by the childish need for approval. To wield this weapon without cutting off your own hand, a part of you needs to die, and this leads us to the dark inner root of this power, the moment of ultimate psychological slaughter. To wield the cold blade of absolute indifference and unnegotiable sacrifice is required. Your old self must be destroyed, and there is no negotiation, no middle ground. That useless fragment of your psyche that still bleeds, begging for justice, that still cries in the dark to be understood by inferior minds, must be annihilated without the slightest pity. This is the inner dark root of true sovereignty. The masses live imprisoned in a blind, chaotic, and purely irrational will. They operate like cogs in a pathetic validation machine, where everyone desperately depends on the recognition of others to feel that they exist. As long as you keep your pride attached to this matrix, you will be brutally sucked into mediocrity. The fatal error of the weak is believing that power lies in convincing, debating, and bending others to their will. The strategic philosophy of true masters reveals the opposite. Supremacy is born from the relentless preservation of one's own vital force, shielding it, almost geometrically, against the emotional misery of the herd. To ascend to that unattainable level of power, you need to look into the trenches of your own mind and assassinate the need to be right. Your wounded ego is your greatest traitor, the enemy spy lodged within your base. It whispers in the dead of night, demanding that you respond to provocations, begging you to prove your worth to people who shouldn't even inhabit your mental map. Cut the throat of that whisper, bleed that childish weakness dry. When you bury the caring self, you re-emerge as an indecipherable and untouchable entity. You don't react to attacks, you rule over them, hovering above the chaos while fools destroy themselves. The transmutation is almost complete. The old, fragile, and reactive self has been reduced to ashes, which leads us to the last and highest step, the final consecration of who you have just become. From today onward, your silence is no longer a mere absence of words. It has just become a decree of absolute sovereignty, a lethal weapon of domination. You no longer walk the streets like prey, begging for crumbs of approval. You now walk with the impassive coldness of a true strategist, the architect of an empire built under the implacable laws of your own reason. While the multitude of weaklings continues to struggle in the labyrinth of shallow emotions, enslaved by cheap provocations, you will watch it all from above. When the whole world screams demanding your attention, you will respond with pure suffocating emptiness. Let the parasites go mad in the vacuum of their illusions. Your vital energy now belongs to you. You are the unquestionable sovereign of your own intellect. The most ruthless power lies not in the violence of the blow, but in the terrifying ability to erase the opponent from their reality without even altering the rhythm of their breathing. Your initiation is complete. If you understand the gravity of this transmutation and are ready to act without a single shred of remorse, the time has come to seal our pact. Scroll down to the comments and write this exact phrase: "My silence is my blade." This is our ritual, the dark code that separates the strategic elite from the common, easily manipulated herd. And if you wish to continue deciphering the invisible and merciless mechanics that govern the top of the human food chain, subscribe to this channel right now. We forge indomitable minds.